Hello, how are you today? I hope you are having a great Monday so far. It's time for Mad History Monday. My name is Megan, and on Mondays I sit down and talk about an interesting story in history. If you like history as much as I do, I highly suggest that you subscribe because I do post one of these videos every other Monday. This week, we are going to talk about a little Key West history. I recently went on vacation to the Keys, and when I was on Key West, I came across this historic site accidentally, and I became really interested in it, and I wanted to do my next video on it. For those of you that don't know, Key West is an island city in Florida, and it is home to the southernmost point of the continental U.S. In the summer of 1860, the U.S. Navy rescued 1,432 Africans that were on board 3 American-owned slave ships en route to Cuba. These people spent weeks in unsanitary, inhumane, and cramped conditions aboard these ships as they sailed across the ocean. The U.S. Navy intercepted these ships, the Wildfire, the William, and the Pagoda. They captured these ships with their own steamships, the Mohawk, the Wyandotte, and the Crusader. Since they were near Cuba, the U.S. Navy brought the refugees to Key West because it was the closest U.S. port. There were men, women, and children aboard these ships, by the way. When they arrived, the Africans were given clothing, food, shelter, and medical assistance. Housing barracks and a hospital were actually built for these people, and they quarantined in this area. Okay, side note for a second. If you're super confused by this, I understand. You might be thinking, well, why did the U.S. Navy rescue these Africans when it wasn't illegal to own slaves in 1860? Slavery wasn't illegal within the U.S., but the transportation of slaves, the slave trade, was outlawed in 1808. People didn't really stop participating in it, but in 1820, another act was passed, and basically the participation in the slave trade was punishable by death due to it being under piracy laws. So more people were probably like, oh, I don't know if I want to mess around with that. Slave traders were looked at as pirates according to the United States. But, of course, people still participated in the slave trade. There were just sometimes harsher repercussions if you got caught. It's crazy to think about what life was like in 1860 because it was almost the Civil War, so tensions across the U.S. were already high. Anywho, this is why the Africans that were rescued on these ships by the U.S. Navy were able to remain free, because they were being transported with the goal to sell, which was illegal. So Key West is America's southernmost city, and even though it was 1860 at the time, it is said that the people on the island were very welcoming and helpful. Many residents of Key West visited the people daily and brought them things like clothing and food. Even the U.S. Marshal, Fernando Moreno, paid for supplies and medical equipment for the Africans with his own money. Citizens donated time and money and supplies as well. So looking at this story, you would think, oh, how great, what a wonderful and uplifting and happy occurrence in history. And I mean, it is, but after just 3 months on the island, 295 of the African refugees had died. They died mainly from various illnesses like typhoid fever and from their confined and horrible conditions aboard the ships prior to being rescued. The rest of the survivors were eventually returned to Africa, specifically Liberia, which was a U.S.-sponsored West African colony for free slaves. But it was kind of a sucky voyage. Many died during it. Most of the survivors never returned to their real homes in Africa. All of the refugees that had died on Key West were buried in unmarked shallow graves along the southern shore, present-day Higgs Beach, and were essentially forgotten about. Daniel Davis, who is a local carpenter, was paid $5.50 by the government for each of the burials. There is a map of these burial grounds drawn in 1861 by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It was labeled African Cemetery. There were 9 small X's drawn on the map to show the location of the graves. 2 years later, during the Civil War, the West Martello Tower Fort was being constructed on the island's southern shore, pretty much exactly where the cemetery was. There were objections to this as the building site, but these objections were overruled. It is said that many human remains were discovered during the building of the fort, but they were just moved other places, mostly to more land areas, and they were forgotten about once again. The West Martello Tower Fort was one of 2, and it actually wasn't completely finished due to lack of funds, warfare, and other complications. It was used in some way during the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, and World War I and World War II. It never did see any actual battle, though. Over the years, it became worn down, and it was actually supposed to be torn down in 1947 because it was an eyesore to the people that lived there. However, it was saved and became the Key West Garden Club, which it still is today. It is beautiful and historical and a must-see on the island. So fast forward again, and it wasn't until 2002 that the graves of these Africans from before the Civil War were, I guess, discovered again or looked into again. Because there was a map of the grave sites from 1861, ground-penetrating radar was used to find the exact locations of the graves. And, well, they found them. Many graves were found about 40 feet east of the fort, and because many of them had been moved prior, it makes sense that many weren't actually found on the beach. It's believed that the graves have been disturbed many times throughout the years due to both construction and erosion. So a memorial plan was drawn up, and the African cemetery at Higgs Beach was developed. And it was then listed on the National Register of Historic Places as a place of unique archaeological significance. That's a pretty big deal. Isn't it crazy that the people that built the fort came across all of these human remains and were just like, oh, I guess we'll just move them? Wild. But, I mean, they didn't have all the rules and regulations of historic preservation like we do now. I would have been so creeped out. But I guess they probably didn't have a choice. Lovely. The cemetery memorial is located on Higgs Beach in a separate rectangular area. There are plaques of remembrance and a large map on the floor of Africa, America, and Cuba showing the passageways of the ships. Visitors can walk through the lush greenery in the fort and then just walk right outside the fence to the cemetery and pay their respects. It really is beautiful and a great place of remembrance. They do a great job of commemorating that slice of history respectfully. But things like this make me so happy. I love when history is preserved and buildings that could have been torn down are turned into something beautiful and memorable. What they turned the West Martello Tower into is just incredible. They preserve the tower and its history while also creating a beautiful community environment. I love that, and it's really a way for us to remember the lives lost on that beach. It's important to keep all of these pieces of the puzzle of history alive. Admission is free into the West Martello Tower, but you can give a donation. I hope you enjoyed learning a little history about Key West today. There is so much history on Key West. It's crazy. I didn't get to see half of it, but even just driving through the city, the buildings are incredible. The amount of historic preservation in just that one city in Florida alone is mind-blowing. I saw a Walgreens inside of an old cinema. It was so cool. I nerded out so much when I was there. It's a very unique island city. It was insanely busy, but the amount of history that you get to see, I think it's worth it to deal with the hassle of the people for a little while. I don't think I would stay on Key West though. There's way too many people. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye!